for today's movie review, I'll be reviewing Magic Island, a movie produced by Full Beam Entertainment. And to explain what Full Beam Entertainment is, I have to explain who Charles Band is. And for those who don't know who he is, Charles Band is a very well-renowned B-movie kingpin, second only to Roger Corman himself. And during the late 80s, early 90s, he formed his own movie studio called Full Moon Entertainment. They were like the asylum of their day, but unlike the asylum where they specialize in making nothing but mockbusters that were purposely made to be bad on purpose, Full Moon Entertainment, on the other hand, actually put effort into making their B-movies. And while Full Moon Entertainment was his primary movie company, he also created a lot of sub-companies, one of them being Full Beam Entertainment, which specialized in a lot of family-friendly movies. And if you're someone who grew up in the late 90s or early 2000s, you probably have either stumbled across one of these movies either through a rental video store or generous showings on television, more specifically Nickelodeon. And in the movie, as far as the cast is concerned, honestly, only two actors stand out. The first one being Zachery Bryan, who most know him for his role as Brad Tyler from Home Improvement, and the second one being Andrew Divoff, who most people probably recognize as the evil Jinn from the first two Wishmaster movies, along with his various villainous roles from other movies and TV shows. And as far as the movie itself is concerned, it's pretty obscure, or if people do know about it, they know it as a movie that had a particular scene that most people thought was a fever dream, which I'll talk about later. But anywho, as far as Magic Island itself is concerned, is the movie a hidden gem, or should it have remained buried? As for the plot of the movie, with his father gone and his mother always away at work, a young, disillusioned teenager decides to run away from home as he feels his mother won't miss him. And as he's about to leave, his nanny gives him a book to read called Magic Island, a book about pirates. And as he begins to read said book, he is soon sucked into the world of Magic Island and finds himself not only taking part in the book's narrative, but also interacting with the various characters of the book itself. Can the teenager find his way back home, or will he, along with the rest of the characters, get captured by Blackbeard and his pirates? So, in terms of what I liked about the movie, the appearance of the actor Andrew Divoff is something of a paradox when it comes to B-movies. Because on the one hand, anytime he does show up in the movie, he's guaranteed to be the best part of the movie itself, which he is, given that he's playing the role of Blackbeard, and you could tell he had a lot of fun playing the character. However, if a movie happens to feature Andrew Divoff as one of the main characters, that's usually a good sign that the movie is of a mediocre quality. Another aspect of the movie I liked is the overall production value of the movie itself, because for something that was essentially a TV-made movie, it had pretty decent production design, in that sense where you could tell a lot of the money went towards the costumes, to even some of the set pieces that our cast of characters interact later with in the movie, especially the temple. Sure, you could tell it looks pretty cheap, but you could also tell that a lot of the money went towards these big sets. And to add on top of that, they also made great usage of the scenery itself, because I have a good feeling that a good majority of the money was put towards having all of the actors filming at this particular location for Magic Island, whatever it was. I assume it was Hawaii because it looks like something you would see in Hawaii. But like I said earlier, they do make good usage of the natural surroundings of this island that they used for the movie. Another aspect of the movie I liked is the way the main character uses the Magic Island book within the movie, because when the main character gets sucked into the actual book, he also receives a physical copy of the book within the actual narrative itself. And I do like how when he tries to look ahead, all the pages are blank, but when he looks at the chapter he's currently on, it has all of the text to that corresponding chapter which he's currently taking part in, which makes him think on his feet in that sense where he tries to figure out how to proceed from there, because he only has information that's relevant to that immediate moment, and see how the chapter plays out. Another aspect of the movie I liked is something I'm going to spoil. Then again, I'm spoiling a moment from a movie that came out in the mid-90s, but whatever. The moment I liked is Blackbeard's death, because for 90% of the movie, Magic Island is fairly comical in nature to a point where it tries to play out like a live-action cartoon, which I'll talk about later, but then you get to Blackbeard's death scene, and my god. Totally speaking, this came out of nowhere because of how bleak it is. Because what ends up happening to Blackbeard is that all of the main characters end up in this treasure room in the temple, and for reasons, you see Blackbeard slowly turning into a gold statue. It becomes a permanent part of the collection. And what makes it bleak is that not only is it unexpected, but it also happens to him at a very slow rate. Because why I bring this up, I think sometime after this, Disney released Aladdin the King of Thieves on home video, and the main villain in that movie ends up getting turned into a gold statue. But whereas that happened at a very quick rate and seemed painless, this here, on top of it happened at a slow rate, you could tell he was in pain as he was turning into gold. And keep in mind, up to this point, the movie had been fairly comical and hasn't really had any dark moments until Blackbeard's death. And I kind of wish the movie had more of this darkness to certain aspects of the movie, because I think it would have really added more of a sense of danger to the island itself. Now, an aspect of the movie I have mixed feelings on are the special effects themselves. And even then, a good majority of them aren't very good, because out of all of these special effects in this movie, in my opinion, the best special effect is for the stone giant that appears near the end of the movie, given that the entire stone giant is done with stop motion animation, and it's easily the best special effect in the entire movie. Even the way it gets destroyed is well done stop motion animation. As for the rest of the special effects, let's just say they're not all that good, starting with the CGI and chroma key effects, only because they're not used often, thankfully, but when they are used, it looks pretty bad. But like I said, it only shows up for a couple seconds, so it's not in the movie for too long, nor is it that distracting when it does show up. But as far as the rest of the special effects are concerned, most of them are practical, and some of the practical effects, like having a skeleton move or tree leaves or branches moving, those aren't too bad, but there's a particular point in time revolving around a sand shark, and while I do appreciate that this sand shark is done using a practical effect, the actual model itself, to me, on top of it looking too small, it also looks too cute, in my opinion. And speaking of sand shark, as I alluded to earlier in this review, I did mention that the movie itself is very obscure to a point that there's a particular scene that a lot of people think was a fever dream, which turned out to be a scene from this movie, that being a point in time where the main character stumbles upon a tree. It just so happens to have pizza slices. He goes over to this tree to get a slice, and it gets attacked by a sand shark. And the way he escapes is by taking said pizza slice, a couple things of bubble gum, chews the bubble gum, puts it on the pizza, tosses it at the sand shark. Sand shark eats it, and when it tries to attack him again, it blows a bubble instead, and he pops it, and it just gets tangled in the sand shark's mouth. And that's how he escapes. And my feelings towards this scene are of a mixed bag variety, because on the one hand, I just love the setup because of how surreal it is, which is also its biggest problem, because, like I said earlier, when most people think of the movie, they just think of this one scene, thinking it was some type of fever dream, only for it to be an actual part of a movie, and I just wish that maybe the movie should have had more scenes like this, where characters get into strange, surreal situations and encounter strange creatures or something. It would have made the movie a little more memorable, in my opinion, if it had more scenes like this. And like I said earlier, the sand shark itself, on top of it looking too cute for its own good, I also think that the actual prop should have been much bigger, in my opinion. Now, in terms of what I disliked about the movie, The acting in this isn't very good, because, like I mentioned earlier, with Andrew Divoff's performance as Blackbeard, it seems like he was having a lot of fun playing this character, whereas all of the other actors, it felt as if they were trying to match the same energy that Andrew Divoff was bringing to his role, and it just doesn't work. Because at least with Blackbeard, he's this larger-than-life figure within this movie. So I feel like all of the actors in this movie should tone their performances back quite a bit. And on top of that, they try to do that whole swashbuckling lingo, and it gets pretty old really fast, in my opinion. And some lines of dialogue they say are also pretty horrendous, and in some cases make no sense. For example, going back to the pizza tree scene with the sand shark, as I mentioned earlier, you have the main character placing bubblegum on a pizza, which he gives to the shark, and the shark blows a bubble. And there's a moment where you see him pop the bubble and he says a one-liner among the lines of, "I gotta blow this joint," and runs away. It's just one of the dumbest lines of dialogue in the entire movie. Because not only is it, one, a dumb line of dialogue, but B, the context leading up to it, here's this kid fearing for his life, and then when that sand shark blows the bubble, it's in the moment he pops it, it's done in a very nonchalant kind of way, which does not match the tone of the scene that occurred a few seconds earlier. And there's a lot of scenes like that where characters just say these lines of dialogue, and it just doesn't land. Another problem that I have with the movie is the premise. Because on pen and paper, it doesn't seem like a bad idea of having a kid get sucked into a book and take part in the adventure. Sure, it's been done before, but I think you could do a lot more with it. As far as this movie is concerned, it seems very bare bones in terms of how the movie starts, how the movie progresses, and how the movie ends. I feel like they could have added a little more substance to it. And for a movie called Magic Island, there's really not that much magic to it. Or there is, but it's very low-tech to a point that it felt like I was watching a theater production as opposed to a movie. So I do wish that maybe the movie could have utilized a lot more magic in certain instances, which kind of leads into another problem I have with the movie, being that of tone. Because for something that's a live-action movie, it feels like the cast and crew treated the movie as if it were a live-action cartoon, which I don't think works to the movie's advantage, because you have all these characters trying to act like a cartoon, but because they're live action, they can't do or perform certain gags as well as something as a cartoon could. So it's one of those cases that I think this would have functioned better as an animated movie instead of a live action movie. Another problem I have with the movie is that the main character's bag of tricks is too convenient for the movie. Now, the book I can understand, because that is a major plot point of the movie. Actually, I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but rewind back a little bit, because the whole setup of the movie is that the main character's father, for whatever reason, is out of the picture, which is never explained, and the mother is constantly working to a point where she hires this babysitter, and there's quite literally a point where the main character decides, you know what, I'm going to run away, because she's gone so often, she probably wouldn't notice that I'm gone. So he just grabs a bunch of random junk from around his room that wouldn't really make sense to bring with him. But sure enough, when he gets transported into the narrative of Magic Island, he seems to happen to have the right piece of junk for the right moment, which really bugs me, because it takes away the suspense of certain key moments that occur throughout the movie. Another problem I have with the movie is the lack of a message, because when I look at the idea of this movie on a pen and paper, I actually think this movie could have had a message, in that sense where you have the main character whose father is just out of the picture for whatever reason, mother's always working, and then the events of the movie play out, but when you see him interacting with the good Buccaneers, consisting of Prince Morgan, Gwen, and some other character whose name I forget off the top of my head. And between Prince Morgan and Gwen, he kind of views them as the surrogate mother and father he never had, and he tries to view them as that. But as the movie progresses, maybe things don't quite go in his favor, because maybe deep down the boy emotionally needs, a good parental figure, and maybe within the context of the narrative, Prince Morgan and Gwen are not fitting the bill, because Prince Morgan and Gwen don't view him as a son, they view him as a younger brother type situation, resulting in the main character going through this character arc, realizing that the good Buccaneers will never be his parents, and learning to accept that his father's not there, but he still has his mother, who'll give him the love that he needs. Sure, the movie kind of tries to do this at the very end, but it just doesn't feel earned. And for the final problem that I have with the movie has to do with the ending. But before I even talk about the ending, I have to talk about the first 10 minutes. Because within this first 10 minutes, when we're getting introduced to our main character and his current situation, we're also introduced to not just his mother, but his babysitter. And his babysitter happens to have the last name such and such. Now, she's the one that gave the main character the Magic Island book. And when the main character eventually gets transported into the book itself, and we meet the good Buccaneers who are associated with Prince Morgan, Gwen, and some other character, we don't know this character's full name at first. Now, fast forward to the moment where the main character is about to go home, and this friend of Prince Morgan reveals his entire name, who just so happens to have the same last name as the babysitter who gave the main character the Magic Island book in the first place, providing a really big WTF moment to a point that even the main character was caught off guard and went, wait, what? Like, my babysitter? Before awakening in his room. And this just raises questions. Like, did the babysitter have an ancestor who took part in this narrative in which this book is based upon? Or was she such a big fan of this book that she changed her last name to this particular character? Or is it just complete coincidence that the babysitter just so happens to have the same last name as one of the characters in this book? I have no idea. So for my final verdict of Magic Island, as a family feature is concerned, it's mostly harmless, but I think you could honestly be doing much better. Now, sure, I do think that Andrew Divoff's performance as Blackbeard is easily the highlight and best parts of the movie, and the story has a lot of potential to be fun and exciting. It's just the execution of it, however, doesn't really come together, because you have special effects that range from being either pretty bad to that was surprisingly good. The acting across the board is really corny at times. Humor isn't really all that funny, and I think the movie's biggest problem is that it's a live-action movie that tries to be an animated feature, and it just doesn't work. So overall, Magic Island is a movie that honestly could have used a bit more magic. And before I give my final rating, what did everyone else have to say about Magic Island? Surprisingly average reception? I mean, sure, I'm taking some of these numbers with a grain of salt, but anywho, for my final rating of Magic Island, I give it a 2 out of 5. So, what's a movie you thought that was just a fever dream that turned out to be real? And see you later.